Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled about today's masterclass because we are going to completely flip how we look at playtime. If you've ever watched a child play and thought, well, at least they're distracted, get ready for a massive perspective shift. Today, we are stepping into the shoes of an expert learning designer. We're going to stop seeing toys as just mere entertainment or store-bought commodities and start understanding them as highly sophisticated developmental instruments.
Right. Let's take a quick look at our syllabus. We've got our learning objectives, the feedback loop, rehearsal and stand-ins, skill building, common mistakes, and we'll wrap it all up with some practice questions.
So I've actually designed this explainer with 3 very specific students in mind for a virtual classroom today: the parent at home, the teacher in the classroom, and the designer creating play spaces. By the time we're done here, you're going to be able to explain exactly how toys simplify reality, spot those crucial feedback loops in everyday play, choose toys based on a child's reachable challenge, and we'll get into what that means, and design play setups that naturally invite true repeated practice. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Introduction. A small model of the world.
Okay, here's the massive perspective shift I mentioned. A toy is not a lesson. It doesn't teach in the traditional sense, right? Instead, think of it as a beautifully disguised, compressed little environment that lets a child safely rehearse life. Kids don't learn by sitting back and listening to a verbal lecture. They learn by doing things, testing boundaries, and noticing what changes. So every good toy out there is really just an open invitation to practice a way of being in the world. And this right here, this perfectly captures what I call the engine of early learning, the feedback loop. It's so elegant. The toy simply creates a closed loop where a child does something, they get immediate feedback, and then they adjust their next move. Imagine a kid pushing a ball. The ball rolls away. Boom. That's not just playtime. That is a stable, repeatable, absolute masterclass in cause and effect, in force, and in making a prediction.
But here's the catch. For this feedback loop to actually work, toys have to simplify the incredibly noisy, chaotic world we live in. It's kind of like trying to pick out the sound of a single violin in a massive orchestra. If you mute the other instruments, suddenly the melody is crystal clear. A toy phone, for example, isn't a real phone. It completely strips away the distractions of actual apps and screens, leaving just the core action of talking to practice. The limits of a toy, like the physical edges of a puzzle, while they aren't obstacles, they are the essential structure that actually guides discovery.
So how does this actually play out in real life for our 3 students today? Well, if you're a parent, you see this when you watch your baby adjust the force of their little hands just to get a ball to roll across the rug. If you're a teacher, you rely on this when a kid learns from the natural physical resistance of a shape sorter, when they realize that a square peg literally will not fit into that round hole. And if you're a designer, you use this by deliberately stripping away the flashing lights and loud noises on something like nesting cups so that child is forced to focus entirely on the relationship of size. You are designing constraint. So, a quick recap on this piece. If everything were possible all at once, nothing would ever be learned. It'd just be overwhelming noise. By narrowing down the possible actions, a toy makes patterns visible. Literally, the limitation is the lesson. That is a huge takeaway. Now I want you to lock this memory tip right into your brain. Think of a toy like a practice wall in a sport, right? The wall doesn't coach you. It doesn't give you instructions or yell at you to fix your stance. It just reliably, consistently returns the ball, letting you feel the timing, the angle, and the force for yourself.
All right, let's shift gears and look at how this builds into social development. Because toys don't just train physical movement, they act as stand-ins for much bigger, far more complex realities. A simple doll, that stands in for practicing language and social scripts. A miniature toy kitchen stands in for sequencing and cooperation. A stuffed animal becomes a safe stand-in for emotional expression.
Think about it. Human social life is incredibly complex and, frankly, full of uncertainty. Pretend play compresses that massive reality into a manageable, bite-sized form. So, when a kid looks at you and says, "The bear is sad today," they aren't just being cute. Seriously, they are safely rehearsing rules, roles, and emotional sequences. They are taking their chaotic inner experiences and organizing them into neat little symbols long before real life becomes way too high stakes to practice directly.
Again, let's look at our 3 groups. For parents, this is why you'll see your child enact an incredibly strict, rigid bedtime routine with a teddy bear. They're trying to make sense of the rules being placed on them. For teachers, it's hearing kids in the block center suddenly negotiating who gets to be the designer and who has to be the helper. They're practicing social hierarchy. And for designers, this means creating a figure that is open-ended enough, maybe a doll without a painted-on smile, so a child can project fear or comfort or hunger right onto it.
So, the big takeaway for this section, the toy itself is never the end goal. Never. It is simply the stage. It's the platform on which a child gets to practice the grand, complicated, messy script of life in a totally safe way.
And here's your memory tip for this concept. A toy works exactly like a rehearsal set in a theater. The set is small, the props are entirely fake, but having them there allows the actor to practice a much larger, very real story.
Okay, let's dive into play as actual skill building. Take a look at this. On the surface, it might look like a child is just aimlessly knocking down blocks or serving you invisible soup. But underneath, a single toy is actually acting as a busy meeting point for multiple forms of development all at once. With blocks, you're getting spatial reasoning, balance, and planning. Pretend food brings in sequencing and social rules. A shape sorter is teaching categorization and error correction. Development is deeply multi-layered.
But, and this is a massive but, a toy only unlocks these deeper skills if it hits the perfect sweet spot. Experts call this the zone of proximal development. In plain English, let's just call it the reachable challenge. It's a challenge that isn't so easy that the kid's brain just goes on autopilot, but it's not so punishingly hard that they burst into tears of frustration. It sits right on the very edge of what they can do, provided they put in just a little bit of effort.
Finding that reachable challenge is an absolute game changer. For a parent, it's realizing that when your toddler drops a spoon off the high chair for the 100th time, they aren't trying to drive you crazy. They are literally testing gravity. It's their current challenge. For a teacher, it's intentionally providing a building set that naturally prompts kids to work together, pushing their shared attention skills. And for the designer, it's meticulously calibrating the difficulty of a puzzle so it demands a bit of struggle but avoids a full-blown meltdown.
Because development doesn't just spontaneously drop into a child from the sky, it is assembled, gradually, piece by piece. What fundamentally changes a child's brain isn't one dramatic, intense moment of play. It's the quiet, steady pattern of repeated experiences. Play magically turns what would normally feel like grueling work into curiosity. It makes all that necessary repetition sustainable.
So think of development like building a bridge out of thousands of tiny pieces. No single piece is the bridge, but the repeated addition of those pieces, that creates the ultimate structure of thought. All right, now that we're all thinking like experts, let's look at some very common mistakes we make when shopping for toys or setting up play spaces. First, judging a toy by flashy educational labels instead of actually asking, what kind of practice does this invite? Second, giving kids only completely open-ended toys, totally forgetting that some kids actually need the structure of constraint, just to get started. Third, we interrupt repetitive behavior, like the dropping we talked about, missing that repetition actually is the method. And if we ignore a child's reachable challenge, we are just guaranteeing boredom or intense frustration. We have to diagnose the system, guys, not just buy a commodity.
Let's do a quick summary of our masterclass before the final exam. Toys are developmental instruments, full stop. They simplify reality to focus attention. True learning happens via that action feedback adjustment loop. Play is the incredible process of building multi-layered skills simultaneously. And finally, a toy's power depends entirely on how well it fits a child's unique, reachable challenge in that exact moment.
Okay, pop quiz time. Let's do some rapid-fire recall to test what we've learned. Number 1, is a toy the lesson or the environment? It's the environment for practice. 2, what does a rolling ball teach? Cause and effect. 3, why do nesting cups work better than a complex pretend kitchen sometimes? Because they lower the noise and simplify reality. 4, is repetition a bug or the feature? Oh, it is absolutely the method. 5, name one thing a puzzle's edge teaches. It teaches us about constraints. And 6, what is the engine of learning? You guessed it, the feedback loop. Nailed it.
Let's step it up to some medium-level scenarios. First, if a child repeatedly knocks down a tower, what are they practicing? Frustration tolerance and cause and effect. Next, if you want to teach turn-taking, what do you grab? A simple ball to roll back and forth. What if a kid is completely bored with open-ended blocks? Find a toy in the useful middle that offers a bit more constraint. On the flip side, what if a toddler cries at a shape sorter? It's outside their reachable challenge, it's just too hard right now. If you see a child use a block as a phone, they are showing amazing flexibility in symbol use. And finally, choosing between a flashy electronic toy or a simple doll, always look past the flash and ask yourself, what kind of thinking does this actually invite?
You all absolutely aced that. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What really shifts when you stop shopping for products and start diagnosing developmental systems? Ask yourself, how does limiting a toy's features actually expand the learning? How is a toy just like a practice wall returning a tennis ball? How does pretend play manage to compress the massive, overwhelming reality of human social life into something a 4-year-old can handle? I promise you, the next time you walk down a toy aisle or watch a child play in your living room or your classroom, you are never going to see it the exact same way again. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy practicing.